Hi everyone, my name is Ashley Zoellner and I did my personality project on Karen Horney. So let's get started. So Karen Horney was born September 16th, 1885 in Germany. Her father was a ship captain. He was very religious and a harsh disciplinarian, and she thought that he preferred her brother burnt over her, and she felt deprived of her father's affections. If she said, if I couldn't be beautiful, I decided I'd be smart. Just a reflection of the insecurities she had ever since she was a kid, probably stemming from the way her father favored her brother. So when she was young, she developed something of a crush on her brother, and embarrassed by her attentions, he pushed her away, and it led to her first depression, which she struggled with for a lot of her life. In 1906, she entered medical school at Freiburg University against her parents' wishes and against the opinions of society at the time. It wasn't normal for women to go to medical school at that time. But this school was actually one of the first medical schools to admit women in Germany. This is where she met her husband, Oscar Horney, who she married in 1909. And he was an authoritarian, just like her father was. He was really harsh with her children, and she didn't really intervene, though. A year later, Karen had a first of her daughters. The following year, her mom died, and that was really hard on her. Soon after, she decided to start studying psychoanalysis at Berlin Medical School, where she became friends with Carl Abraham, who was a loyalist to Freud, which is why she probably based a lot of her own work on Freud's, although she changed it quite a bit. So in 1923, her husband got meningitis and lost his job. He became argumentative and miserable. The same year, her brother died, and Karen went into another depression and even had thoughts of suicide. 1926, it was a few years later, she left her husband, and as World War II was approaching, she left Germany for the US. She lived in Chicago for a while, where she helped establish the Chicago Institute of Psychoanalysis. Later, she moved to Brooklyn, where she developed her theories about neurosis. So Karen Horney had some questions about the religious morals, especially when it came to love. Her father was really religious, and so she went to a school that focused on religion and didn't believe in teaching the sciences, such as biology. After elementary school, she convinced her father to let her go to a school that taught medicine or science because she knew she wanted to study science to go to medical school, even though they weren't really allowing women to enroll quite yet. As a teenager, Karen would write in a diary where she questions religious morals, especially the concept of giving yourself to a man outside of a marriage. At that time, teenage girls didn't talk about these things. She noticed that most marriages were for money and they weren't good marriages. She probably felt this way because her mother had admitted to her that she had only married her father, so she wouldn't be left on the shelf. In her diary, she would talk about how much she longed for love and questioned why she couldn't find it. So she had a theory about the conception of the self. It starts with the actual self, which is who we are in the present, including all of our strengths and weaknesses. She thought a healthy person would have the actual self would be more aligned with the real self, which the real self is the possible self, which is potential we all have within us, our capabilities, temperaments, talents, predispositions that promotes growth, and when combined with a nurturing environment can lead to self-realization. Self-realization is about self-acceptance and freedom to realize your potential. According to Horney, self-realizing people were in touch with themselves, their worth, their values, and their goals in their lives. They also had boundaries to protect their realized self. She recognized that self-realization could take different forms depending on the culture they grew up in. But without a nurturing environment, we lose touch with the real self. So we could head toward the idealized self, which is what she called the impossible self. It represents the unrealistic demands we make on ourselves, such as the need to be perfect. The tyranny of the shoulds is the shoulds that haunt us. It's what we think we should be. It can lead to anxiety for not living up to the idealized self. It could be like, I should always be kind, I should be the best. And it can lead to the despised self when the shoulds can't be satisfied, and leads to self-hatred and neurosis. So she believed that anxiety comes from those extreme unrealistic needs that are unfulfilled in interpersonal relationships, especially child to parent relationships. People try to deal with these needs by overusing coping strategies, causing conflict and confusion, and these can develop into a neurosis. So there's 3 coping strategies. The first one is compliance. It moves toward others. These people seek affirmation and acceptance from others, desperate need for love and approval. The second coping strategy is aggression, which moves you against others. These people have a need to control other people, are authoritarian, and usually unkind. And the third and last coping strategy that she talked about was withdrawal, which she called the detached personality. And this personality moves you away from others. They usually have antisocial behaviors. So all of these needs and coping strategies may manifest in our lives at some point, but when someone lets one coping strategy become their only way to relieve their basic anxiety, they can become neurotic and it can dominate their personality. So parental indifference is what Horney called the basic evil. It kind of reflects on her feelings of inferiority, that her brother was loved by her parents more than her. She thought that because not all neurotic people who were abused or neglected as children, there must be another reason for the neurosis. So parental indifference, she defines as a lack of warmth or affection in childhood, because children need to feel loved, safe, and valued. So according to Horney, what was really important about parental indifference was the child's response. If children don't feel loved, safe, and valued, they may develop poor coping habits. So if they respond with their indifference with anger, and they find this effective to get attention from their parents, it becomes a habitual response to life's problems, leads to aggressive coping strategy. They think, if I have power, no one can hurt me. The second response is basic anxiety. A child tries to win the parent over, and if this works for the child, they develop a compliance coping strategy. They think, if I can make you love me, you will not hurt me. The third one is withdrawal. So when anxiety and hostility strategies don't work, they might withdraw into themselves. They think, if I withdraw, nothing can hurt me. And that's how all these coping strategies become kind of a habit. So one thing I really liked about Karen Horney was her psychology, her feminism psychology. She questioned the inferior view of women at the time. In 1922, in her book, The Flight from Womanhood, she pointed out that the psychology of women was based on men's interpretations of women that came from their desires and disappointments about them. Like being assertive wasn't seen as a trait that women should have. Still kind of isn't, but a little more intense back then. She also emphasized the effects of culture. She understood that culture had a big influence on women and how they were viewed. She believed that qualities expected of women, such as passivity, compliance, independence, were the qualities that men wanted in women, not necessarily their true nature. For this period of time, these ideas were really radical. So sorry, there's a little bit of nudity here. Cover earmuffs, cover your eyes. So She also openly criticized Freud's ideas about penis envy. She believed that while neurotic women might have penis envy, it wasn't something that occurred in all women. It wasn't universal. It was really about being envious of the power that men had over them in society. She thought that men were actually jealous that women were able to bear children, which she called womb envy. Maybe men's need to succeed and have their names live on after them, to have a dynasty, could be considered compensation for not being able to bear children. So because she expanded or criticized Freud's ideas, I thought it would be appropriate to compare and contrast them. The main things they differed on was that Horney emphasized the importance of the environment, interpersonal relationships, especially between a child and parent, while Freud believed that there were biological instincts and urges that shaped personality. Horney was also more positive about people being able to grow towards self-realization, while Freud had more of a darker outlook. Also, the penis envy versus womb envy that was mentioned earlier. But they both believed that early childhood was important to the development of their personality. They both used free association, dream analysis in their therapy, and both believed in anxiety and the defense mechanisms. So what would Karen say about me? Because she emphasized the importance of parental affection in childhood and its effect on the development of coping strategies, I believe she would ask a lot about my childhood. I think she would recognize that my mother's absence for a lot of my childhood and not knowing who my father was might be the source for my needs of affection and approval. My grandma that we lived with was pretty authoritarian. Punishments were really old school, I guess you could say. So I was pretty scared of disappointing her. I grew to be fearful of failure, which could be a reason I might have a need for perfection and sometimes use a withdrawal type of coping strategy and have a lot of anxiety when it comes to taking on new challenges for fear of failing. She would probably say that I haven't been very accepting of myself in the past. I don't think she would think that I'm neurotic, though. I've grown a lot in the last 5 years, so I think she might see this as growth, as heading down a path to self-realization, I hope. So I really like that Horney realized that culture and interpersonal relationships had a big impact on people, how they developed personality. It seems so obvious now, but it seemed like Freud's theories were more accepted at the time. He believed internal instincts shape culture. So it seems like people didn't really think culture was actually shaping people's personalities. It was more like the other way around. I also really liked her ideas about feminism. She seemed ahead of her times when it came to the reason women were seen as inferior. She understood that women were basically brainwashed into thinking they were supposed to be a certain way because of men's expectations of them. And although it still felt a little bit today, I think that because of women like her, we've progressed a lot. I also liked how she stood up against Freud's penis envy and saw it for what it really was, because, it's kind of crap. It was justified jealousy of the power men held in society. I can imagine men's faces when they heard of her theory of womb envy. She may have had a lot of self-esteem issues, but she was actually pretty badass in my opinion. So that's my presentation. I hope you guys enjoyed. Have a good day, guys. Thank you.